Did you know medieval women were just sitting at home knitting all day? Did you believe they couldn't own their own businesses or run vast estates? From the 5th to the 15th century, the truth about women at work will shock you. Number 10. Medieval working women were just homemakers, stuck inside all day. This is a picture many people paint a woman perpetually confined to her cottage, her days filled only with domestic chores like spinning wool or preparing meals. The truth of medieval working women shatters this narrow view. The landscape of medieval Europe teemed with women performing vital, active, and often public labor. Their contributions were fundamental to the survival and prosperity of families, villages, and entire urban centers. A stroll through any medieval town or a look at the fields surrounding a manor would reveal a much more dynamic scene. In rural areas, which comprised the vast majority of medieval society, women were deeply embedded in agricultural work. Their hands toiled alongside men's in the fields from dawn until dusk. Records from manorial estates, such as those found in the English Domesday Book surveys, detail women's roles in planting, weeding, and harvesting. They gathered crops, tended small garden plots that fed their families, and managed the poultry and livestock that were essential for sustenance and trade. A peasant woman named Alara, living in the village of Chilton in 1285, spent her days pulling weeds from the barley fields, her back aching under the sun, just as her husband did. Her mornings often began with milking cows before the first light, and her evenings ended after feeding the pigs and securing the chickens. The entire agricultural cycle, from the spring plowing to the autumn threshing, demanded the collective effort of every household member, with women often leading tasks like gleaning after the harvest or binding sheaves of wheat. Beyond the fields, women were often the primary brewers of ale, a staple drink for everyone in an era when water quality was often suspect. The brewing process, a complex and physically demanding task involving boiling large vats of water, malting grain, and fermenting the mixture, was a common occupation for women across all social classes. In many villages, the brewster was a well-known figure, providing a necessary commodity to her community. Tax records from towns like Colchester in the 14th century show numerous women listed as brewers, indicating their economic independence and the public nature of their trade. These women did not just brew for their families, they ran small businesses selling their ale to neighbors and travelers. The image of the alewife with her distinctive ale stake outside her door was a familiar sight, signaling her public role in commerce. In urban settings, women's work was even more visible and diverse. They were shopkeepers, market vendors, and artisans. The streets of medieval cities buzzed with the activities of female merchants. Accounts from the city of Florence in the 13th century describe women selling everything from eggs and cheese to woven cloth and spices in the bustling markets. A woman named Isabella ran a stall in the Mercato Vecchio, her sharp eye for quality and her quick wit making her a formidable presence among the other vendors. She negotiated prices, managed her inventory, and handled her own finances, all in the public square. These women were not merely assisting their husbands. Many were operating independent enterprises, navigating the complex world of urban trade on their own terms. The service industry also relied heavily on women. They worked as innkeepers, managing bustling taverns and guest houses where travelers found food, drink, and lodging. The role of the innkeeper required immense organizational skills, the ability to manage staff, and a knack for handling diverse clientele. In medieval Paris, records indicate many women owned and operated bathhouses, vital public spaces for hygiene and social interaction. These were not small, quiet endeavors, they were public establishments, often operating late into the night, demanding constant oversight and interaction with the public. Even in more domestic-sounding roles, such as baking, women often turned their household skill into a public trade. While many women baked bread for their families, others became professional bakers, operating public ovens, or selling their loaves in the market. The sheer scale of demand for bread meant that many towns had numerous female bakers. The city of York in the 15th century, for example, lists several women as backsters, a term for female bakers who contributed significantly to the city's food supply and economy. These women often worked long hours managing hot ovens and large quantities of dough, a far cry from a quiet, confined domestic existence. Women were also crucial in the textile industry, not just spinning at home, but often working in larger workshops. While spinning was a ubiquitous activity for women of all classes, it often formed the basis of commercial endeavors. Many women spun thread that was then sold to weavers, or they themselves were weavers, producing cloth for sale. The silk women of London formed powerful guilds, not just weaving silk, but often overseeing large workshops, employing other women, and managing the entire production and sale of luxury silk goods. These were commercial enterprises, highly skilled and run by women who operated openly in the city, engaging in trade and employing others. Even among the nobility, women were far from confined. While their sphere was the management of a vast household rather than direct physical labor in the fields, their roles were equally public and demanding. Noble women often managed entire estates, especially when their husbands were away at war or court. They oversaw agricultural production, managed finances, dispensed justice in manorial courts, and supervised numerous household staff. Lady Margaret Paston, whose letters from the 15th century reveal much about daily life, frequently discussed estate management, legal disputes, and financial transactions. She was actively involved in protecting her family's property and income, a role that brought her into direct contact with tenants, bailiffs, and legal officials, demanding a public presence and strong leadership. She rode horses, inspected properties, and defended her family's rights with determination, far from a secluded life. The concept of women being exclusively confined to the domestic sphere simply does not stand up to the wealth of historical evidence. Medieval working women were integral to the functioning of their societies, participating in a vast array of jobs that took them out of the home and into the public eye, where they contributed economically, socially, and culturally. Their days were filled with diverse and demanding work, much of it outside the walls of their cottages, proving their essential role in the very fabric of medieval life. Number 9. Medieval women could not own property or run businesses independently. This is a common misconception that medieval women were entirely without economic agency, unable to possess property or establish their own commercial ventures. The reality is far more nuanced and demonstrates that medieval legal and social structures, while often patriarchal, offered significant pathways for women to acquire, hold, and manage property, and to run independent businesses, especially in specific circumstances. The status of a woman dog, whether she was single, married, or widowed, played a crucial role in determining her economic rights and opportunities. Single women, often referred to as femme sole in legal terms, possessed considerable rights to own and control property and to engage in trade. In many urban centers, the laws of the town or borough explicitly recognize the femme sole as a legal entity capable of entering contracts, owning land, and conducting business in her own name. For example, the customs of London allowed a single woman to pursue any trade and to be sued or sue in her own name completely independently of any male relative. This meant a single woman could open a shop, manage a craft workshop, or trade goods without needing the consent or involvement of a father or brother. These women were not just apprentices or assistants, they were independent entrepreneurs. Records from various cities across medieval Europe, including Paris, Bruges, and Bologna, show numerous instances of single women recorded as independent merchants, artisans, and property owners. The widows, perhaps even more so than single women, frequently wielded significant economic power. Upon the death of their husbands, widows often inherited property, including land, houses, and businesses. It was common practice for a widow to continue her late husband's trade, ensuring the continuity of the family enterprise and the support of her children. This was not a passive inheritance. It often meant taking over the full management and operational control of a complex business. The widow of a successful merchant might inherit ships, warehouses, and extensive trade networks, becoming a major player in her own right. For example, Agnes, the widow of a mercer in Coventry in the 15th century, continued to run her husband's textile business, managing apprentices, negotiating prices, and overseeing the sale of goods across several counties. Her tax assessments show she was a substantial property owner and a significant contributor to the city's economy. The wills and testaments preserved in archives frequently reveal detailed provisions for widows inheriting and controlling assets, demonstrating their recognized capacity for economic independence. Even married women, though legally often considered femme covert under the legal cover of their husbands, had more economic agency than commonly believed. While their husband legally managed their joint property in many jurisdictions, women often brought dowries into the marriage, which represented a significant portion of their family's wealth, and often remained under their nominal control, or at least ensured their financial security if widowed. Moreover, in many urban settings, the concept of femme sole also extended to married women who were registered as operating a separate trade from their husbands. This legal innovation allowed a married woman to conduct her own business, accrue debts, and pursue legal action related to her trade independently. For instance, a married woman who ran a separate brewing business might not have her husband liable for her business debts, effectively making her an independent economic actor in that sphere. This was particularly prevalent in London, where many married women were registered as sole traders, operating their own shops or workshops entirely separate from their husbands' professions. Women also held property through trusts or special arrangements. In some cases, land or assets were settled upon a woman for her sole use, independent of her husband's control, ensuring her financial security. This might be arranged by her family before marriage or through specific legal instruments. Such arrangements provided women with direct control over income-generating assets, even within marriage. Her court records show women engaging in legal disputes over these properties, demonstrating their active role in defending their economic interests. The ability to lease property was another avenue for economic activity. Women, both single and widowed, frequently leased shops, market stalls, and even houses, generating income from rent or using the leased premises for their own businesses. The accounts of landlords and city authorities often list women as tenants, underscoring their active participation in the property market. For example, the records of the city of Paris show numerous women leasing market stalls to sell their wares, paying rent directly to the city treasury, indicating their independent commercial standing. Furthermore, women frequently engaged in financial transactions, including borrowing and lending money. This indicates their recognized capacity to manage finances and their participation in the broader medieval economy. Money lending was not confined to a single-gender women, particularly wealthy widows often lent money to others, including men, and secured these loans with property or other assets. These transactions are documented in various account books and legal documents, showing women as active participants in the financial networks of their communities. The fact that medieval legal systems often had mechanisms for women to sue and be sued over debts further reinforces their independent financial standing in many contexts. Even women in noble households, while not running a business in the same way as a merchant, were often responsible for managing vast estates and their associated income. When a lord was absent, his lady would often take full charge of the estate, overseeing agricultural production, collecting rents, managing household expenses, and even adjudicating disputes among tenants. These were responsibilities that involved considerable financial acumen and decision-making power over significant assets and income streams. The letters of Lady Eleanor of Castile in the 13th century, for example, reveal her deep involvement in managing her extensive dower lands and revenues. The evidence points to a vibrant landscape where women, especially single women and widows, were significant property holders and independent business owners, contributing to the economic vitality of their communities. Even married women found ways to exercise economic agency, particularly in urban environments, through specific legal provisions. The idea that medieval women were universally excluded from property ownership or independent enterprise is a simplification that overlooks the complex realities of their economic lives. Number 8, medieval women were not educated or literate. The idea that medieval women were universally uneducated and illiterate is a widespread stereotype, painting a picture of women entirely excluded from intellectual life and the written word. However, historical evidence reveals a more diverse reality, where women across various social strata acquired literacy and education, often for practical purposes, sometimes for spiritual devotion, and occasionally for intellectual pursuits. While female literacy rates were generally lower than male rates and formal schooling was less accessible, many women found avenues to learn and utilize reading and writing skills. For women in religious orders, education was not just common, it was fundamental to their lives. Convents and nunneries were centers of learning, where nuns were expected to read Latin for their religious services and often learned to read and write in the vernacular. Many nunneries had extensive libraries, and some became renowned for their scholarly pursuits, copying manuscripts, and even producing original literary works. Figures like Hildegard of Bingen, a 12th century abbess, was a prolific writer of theological, scientific, and musical works, demonstrating a profound level of education and intellectual engagement. Ratsvit of Gandersheim, a 10th century canoness, wrote plays and poems in Latin, making her one of the earliest known female playwrights in European history. These women were not exceptions. They were products of environments where female literacy and intellectual development were valued and cultivated. Among the nobility and upper classes, daughters were often educated at home by tutors or in convents. This education was often practical, focusing on household management, estate administration, and religious instruction, but it frequently included reading and writing. A noblewoman needed to be able to read and write to manage household accounts, correspond with absent husbands or family members, and oversee the complex affairs of a large estate. The extensive correspondence of families like the Pastons in 15th century England provides clear evidence of female literacy. Margaret Paston's letters are numerous, detailed, and written in her own hand, discussing everything from legal battles to family matters, demonstrating not just literacy, but a sophisticated command of language. These letters show she read and wrote regularly, managing communication across their vast network. For urban women, particularly those involved in commerce, literacy was often a practical necessity. A merchant's wife or an independent female shopkeeper needed to be able to keep accounts, write receipts, and manage correspondence related to her business. The records from merchant guilds and city archives sometimes contain documents signed by women, or their names appear in ledgers as having completed transactions, suggesting at least a functional literacy. A female baker in Tours in the 14th century might need to read orders or keep records of sales, while a woman running a successful inn would need to manage inventories and guest lists. The rise of vernacular literature and the availability of more books, albeit still expensive, also contributed to an increase in lay literacy, including among women who sought entertainment or spiritual guidance through reading. Women in artisanal trades sometimes required literacy for their craft. For example, female scribes and illuminators, who often worked in workshops alongside men, needed to read the texts they were copying and illustrating. While the majority of professional scribes were men, female scribes are documented in various centers, particularly in Paris. A woman named Jeanne de Montbaston, working in Paris in the 14th century, ran a successful family illumination business with her husband, and she was clearly literate to be involved in the production of manuscripts. Her name appears in records as being involved in the book trade, indicating her professional engagement with written materials. Even among the peasant classes, while formal education was rare, a rudimentary form of literacy was not entirely absent. Women learned to identify saints' names, prayers, and common symbols, which could be considered a form of visual literacy. While most peasants would not have been able to read complex texts, some might have learned to recognize their names or numbers for basic transactions, particularly those who regularly frequented markets or dealt with manorial lords. Evidence from wills and court documents sometimes shows women affixing their marks rather than signatures, suggesting illiteracy, but this is not universal. Some might have been able to sign their names even if their reading comprehension was limited. The proliferation of devotional texts in the vernacular, such as books of hours and prayer books, also suggests a growing demand for female literacy. These books were often illustrated or meant for personal use, implying that their owners, many of whom were women, could read them. The existence of numerous female saints' lives and religious narratives translated into common languages further indicates an expectation that women would engage with these texts. These were not just listened to, they were often read privately. The presence of female teachers, particularly within convents or noble households, also points to a system of education for women. These women were themselves educated and passed on their knowledge, including literacy, to younger generations of girls. Some towns also had small schools or tutors where girls, usually from wealthier families, could receive instruction alongside boys or in separate classes. The overall picture is that while opportunities were structured differently for women than for men, education and literacy were not entirely denied to them. For many women, literacy was a practical skill essential for managing households, running businesses, engaging in religious life, or pursuing professional crafts. The stereotype of the illiterate medieval woman overlooks the significant number of women who engaged with the written word, shaped intellectual discourse, and managed complex affairs through their knowledge of reading and writing. Number 7. Medieval women only did female jobs like spinning or weaving. The notion that medieval women were confined to a narrow range of female occupations, primarily domestic duties or textile production, is a gross oversimplification of their economic roles. While spinning and weaving were indeed common activities for women, particularly in the domestic sphere and as part of widespread industries, women were actually involved in an astonishingly diverse array of trades and professions, many of which required significant skill, physical strength, or intellectual acumen, and were often considered male-dominated. One of the most surprising areas of female involvement was in construction. Women worked as laborers, carrying stones, mixing mortar, and preparing sites for building. Records from medieval cathedrals and castles in France and England show women listed among the paid laborers performing arduous physical tasks. For instance, accounts from the building of Caernarfon Castle in Wales in the late 13th century list women among the workforce, involved in moving materials and assisting masons. They were not just passive observers but active participants in shaping the built environment of their time. Some evidence even suggests women worked as masons or at least assisted closely with stone dressing. In the food industry, beyond baking and brewing, women were involved in butchery, fishmongering, and running cookshops. In many towns, women were registered as butchers, responsible for slaughtering animals, preparing meat, and selling it in the market. This was a physically demanding and skilled trade. Records from Paris in the 13th century list women among the butchers who sold meat in the public markets. Similarly, women were prominent fishmongers, not just selling fish, but often involved in its preparation and preservation. They also operated cookshops and taverns, preparing hot meals for laborers and travelers, a highly public and demanding business that required management skills and a strong stomach. The textile industry was indeed dominated by women, but their roles extended far beyond simple spinning. Women were skilled weavers, fullers, dyers, embroiderers, and tailors. The silk women of London, a powerful guild in the 14th and 15th centuries, were not just creating silk, they were managing entire workshops, employing other women, and producing highly luxurious and complex silk products for the elite. These were master craftswomen running sophisticated businesses. In Florence, women were involved in the intricate process of wool finishing, a series of steps that required precision and expertise. Women also ventured into healthcare. While male doctors dominated the universities, women often served as local healers, midwives, and sometimes even surgeons. This midwifery was an exclusively female profession, vital for childbirth. But women also treated common ailments, set bones, and even performed minor surgeries, drawing on generations of knowledge and practical experience. For example, Magistra Salernitana, a group of women physicians from the Schola Medica Salernitana in Italy, were highly respected medical practitioners and writers in the 11th and 12th centuries, producing important medical texts. Their knowledge was extensive, covering herbal remedies, practical medicine, and even surgical procedures. In manufacturing, women were involved in various skilled trades. They worked as hat makers, shoemakers, glove makers, and even armorers. The guild records from various cities often mention women among the members of these crafts, sometimes as wives assisting their husbands, but often as independent practitioners, especially widows who continued the family business. Records from Lubeck in the 14th century show women working as parchment makers and bookbinders, trades requiring precision and specialized knowledge. In Cologne, women worked as goldsmiths and jewelers, creating intricate and valuable pieces of art. Agricultural labor, as previously mentioned, was comprehensive for women. They were field workers, plowwomen in some regions, and managers of dairy production. They were also responsible for tasks like harvesting hay, winnowing grain, and processing agricultural products into food, drink, and other goods. Their physical contributions were indispensable to the medieval economy. Even in legal roles, women were present, albeit indirectly. While not typically lawyers, women acted as procurators in court for their husbands or family members, representing their interests. They also appeared in court to defend their own property rights, sue for debts, or seek justice, demonstrating their engagement with the legal system. For example, a woman named Alice Perrers in 14th century England was a powerful figure at court, involved in numerous legal and financial dealings, indicating a sophisticated understanding of the legal landscape. Women also engaged in highly specialized and sometimes surprising artistic endeavors. They worked as illuminators of manuscripts, adding intricate designs and illustrations to religious text and secular works. This was a highly skilled and often lucrative profession. Some women are known to have been painters and sculptors, though their works are less often attributed to them. The range of their professional activities far exceeded the simple image of a woman at a spinning wheel. Medieval working women were integral to almost every sector of the economy, bringing diverse skills and labor to the forefront of society. Number 6. Medieval women had no legal rights or protections in the workplace. The perception that medieval women were entirely devoid of legal rights or protections within the workplace is an oversimplification. While medieval legal systems were undeniably patriarchal and structured to favor men, particularly husbands, women did possess a surprising array of legal standings and protections that allowed them to participate in economic life, pursue justice, and safeguard their interests. Their legal rights varied significantly depending on their marital status, social class, and geographical location, but they were not simply powerless entities. Single women, often referred to as femmes-seules, enjoyed a relatively strong legal position. As mentioned previously, they were legally recognized as independent individuals, capable of entering into contracts, owning property, incurring debts, and initiating or defending lawsuits in their own name. This meant that a single woman running a business could legally pursue customers who owed her money, defend herself against claims, and enter into agreements with suppliers or employees. For example, in London, the customs of the city explicitly recognized the femmes-seules as a distinct legal personality, allowing her to trade independently and to be sued for her business debts without her male relatives being liable. This legal framework provided significant protection and agency for women who chose to remain unmarried or were widowed and conducting business. Widows often inherited their deceased husband's legal standing and sometimes even his civic rights, including the right to continue his trade and manage his property. Their laws regarding dower rights ensured that a widow was entitled to a portion of her husband's property, typically 1/3 of his lands and goods, for her lifetime. This dower was a legally protected right, intended to ensure her economic survival and independence. If this right was infringed upon, she could appeal to the courts to enforce it. For example, the court rolls of manorial courts in England frequently show widows petitioning for their rightful dower lands and winning their cases against male relatives who sought to dispossess them. This legal protection was crucial for many women to maintain their economic footing after the loss of a spouse. Even married women, though generally under the legal authority of their husband's femme covert, had specific protections and avenues for legal action. In many towns and cities, particularly in England, a married woman could be recognized as a femme sole merchant, allowing her to trade independently of her husband. This status meant she could enter into contracts, incur debts, and sue, or be sued concerning her specific trade, without implicating her husband. This was a vital legal innovation that facilitated the active participation of married women in urban commerce. For example, a woman running a successful brewery in medieval York might be registered as a femme sole merchant, meaning she was legally responsible for her brewing business, not her husband. This allowed her to operate independently within the legal framework of her city. Women also possessed rights related to their personal property, even within marriage. While their husband managed most marital property, a woman often had control over her paraphernalia, personal items such as clothing, jewelry, and sometimes even household goods, which were considered her personal property and not subject to her husband's debts. While this might seem minor, for many women these items represented significant wealth and could be used as collateral or sold in times of need. Furthermore, prenuptial agreements, though not as common as today, did exist, and could stipulate specific rights for the wife regarding her property or income, providing legal safeguards for her financial autonomy. Women also had access to various courts to seek justice. They could initiate lawsuits for debt recovery, property disputes, slander, or even violent assault. Records from manorial courts, ecclesiastical courts, and royal courts frequently show women appearing as plaintiffs and defendants. For example, in the Manor Court of Wakefield in the 14th century, women regularly sued their neighbors for trespass, unpaid debts, or breach of contract. They defended their reputations against slander and sought redress for injuries. This active participation in the legal system indicates that women were aware of their rights and were willing and able to pursue legal recourse when necessary. Guilds, while sometimes restricting full membership to men, often had provisions for women. As mentioned earlier, widows could often take over their husband's guild membership and run the workshop, inheriting his rights and responsibilities. Some guilds, particularly in industries like silk production or brewing, even admitted women as full members in their own right. These memberships provided legal protections, including the right to trade within the guild's jurisdiction, access to guild support networks, and protection from unfair competition. The London Silkwomen's Guild, for example, was run entirely by women, who had their own rules, elected their own leadership, and protected their members' interests through legal means. Finally, some legal protections aimed at ensuring fair labor practices applied to women as well as men. While not always enforced perfectly, laws regarding wages, working conditions, and contracts existed in various forms, and women could, in theory, seek redress if these laws were violated. For instance, royal ordinances concerning the assize of bread and ale, which set prices and standards, would implicitly protect both male and female brewers and bakers from unfair competition, and also ensure the quality of their product, which in turn protected their reputation and livelihood. The legal landscape for medieval women was complex and often contradictory, but it was far from a vacuum of rights. For women, particularly single women and widows, had substantial legal standing regarding property and business. Even married women found ways to operate within the legal framework to protect their economic interests. The numerous court cases involving women as plaintiffs and defendants, their ability to own property, and their participation in various forms of commerce all demonstrate that medieval working women possessed and exercised significant legal rights and protections in their economic lives. Number 5, medieval women were paid less than men for the exact same work. This stereotype suggests that medieval women were universally undervalued in the workforce, always receiving lower wages than men for identical tasks. While wage disparities certainly existed in many sectors and for many types of labor, particularly unskilled physical labor, it is not a universally true statement across the entire medieval economy. In numerous specialized trades, piecework, and independent business ventures, women often earned comparable wages to men for work of equal quality, or they set their own prices for their goods and services. In agricultural labor, where wages were often set by the day, it was common for women to receive less than men. For example, a woman hired for haymaking might receive 2 pence a day, while a man performing the same task might receive 3 pence. This disparity was often justified by the assumption that men performed heavier or more demanding work, or simply by prevailing social norms. However, in tasks like weeding or gleaning, where the physical demands were more equal, the wage gap might have been smaller, or women might have been compensated in kind with a share of the harvest. However, when it came to skilled craft work or piecework, the situation often changed dramatically. In trades where the output was quantifiable and quality was paramount, payment was frequently based on the piece produced, not the gender of the producer. A skilled female illuminator, for instance, producing a decorated manuscript page, would be paid the same rate as a male illuminator for a page of equivalent quality and complexity. The value was in the artistry and skill, not the gender of the artist. Workshop records from Paris in the 14th century show payments to both male and female illuminators for specific tasks on manuscripts, with no apparent gender-based differential for the same work. Similarly, in the textile industry, particularly in weaving, women often earned wages comparable to men, especially when paid by the yard or by the finished piece of cloth. A highly skilled female weaver producing fine wool or silk would command a price for her product or a wage for her labor that reflected her skill and the quality of her output, not her gender. The silkwomen of London, for example, producing luxury goods, set high prices for their exquisite wares, reflecting the high value of their labor. Their earnings were commensurate with the quality of their work and the market demand for their products, allowing them to accumulate significant wealth. In professional roles like brewing, baking, or innkeeping, where women often operated as independent business owners, they set their own prices for their goods and services. A female brewster might charge the same price for a gallon of ale as a male brewster, and her income would depend on the volume of her sales and the efficiency of her operation, not her gender. The price of her ale was determined by market forces, the cost of ingredients, and her desired profit margin, not by a gendered wage scale. Records of urban markets consistently show uniform prices for staple goods like bread and ale, regardless of whether they were produced by men or women. Furthermore, in specific roles like midwifery, which was almost exclusively a female profession, women commanded fees based on their expertise and the vital nature of their service. These fees were not subject to comparison with male wages, as there were no male midwives to compare against. The same applied to female healers who dispensed remedies, and advice their fees were determined by the perceived value of their knowledge and the efficacy of their treatments. In cases where women worked alongside men as master artisans or independent contractors, their earnings often reflected their skill and experience. For example, records of master painters or glassmakers sometimes show women listed as collaborators or proprietors, earning a share of the profits or a direct fee for their contribution. In Cologne, women working as goldsmiths and jewelers produced high-value items, and their income would have reflected the value of their craft, not a gendered reduction. It is also important to consider compensation in kind. In many rural settings, workers were paid not just in coin, but also with food, lodging, or access to land. The value of these forms of compensation might have been equitable regardless of gender, or in some cases, women performing essential tasks might have received a larger share of household resources. The wage disparities, when they occurred, were often more pronounced in large scale, unskilled or semi-skilled labor pools, especially those directly overseen by large landlords or employers, where women might be hired at a lower rate for tasks perceived as less physically demanding or for labor surplus. However, in the vast and varied landscape of medieval crafts, services, and independent enterprises, women often earned a living wage that was directly proportionate to their skill, output, and the market value of their goods, irrespective of their gender. The blanket statement that medieval women were always paid less for the same work overlooks the significant economic agency and earning potential that many women possess through their specialized skills and entrepreneurial endeavors. Number 4. Medieval women cannot join guilds or hold positions of power in them. The widespread belief that medieval guilds were exclusive male clubs, completely barring women from membership or leadership, is a significant misunderstanding of these vital economic and social organizations. While many guilds were indeed male-dominated, particularly in crafts associated with heavy labor or political power, women were active members in numerous guilds, and in some, they even held significant positions of authority and power, running their own workshops and influencing guild policy. Guilds were associations of craftsmen or merchants that regulated their trade, provided social welfare for their members, and often held considerable civic power. Their rules varied widely by city, region, and specific trade. In many guilds, especially those related to textiles, food production, and other traditionally female-associated crafts, women's participation was not only accepted but essential. One of the most common ways for women to gain guild membership was through their husbands. When a guildsman died, his widow often inherited his guild membership and the right to continue his trade. This was a crucial provision that ensured the economic stability of the family and the continuity of the business. The widow would effectively step into her husband's shoes, taking on his apprentices, running the workshop, and often managing the business for many years. Records from numerous cities such as London, Paris, and Cologne confirm this practice across a wide range of crafts, from goldsmiths to drapers. For example, the widow of a pewterer in London in the 14th century would continue to produce and sell pewter goods under the guild's regulations, often employing journeymen and apprentices, both male and female. She was not just a nominal head, she was the active master of the workshop. Beyond inherited membership, women were often admitted as full members in their own right, particularly in crafts where women's labor was central. The silkwomen of London provide one of the most prominent examples. This guild, which specialized in the production of luxury silk goods, was composed entirely of women and was led by women. They had their own ordinances, elected their own wardens, and directly petitioned the king and parliament, demonstrating significant economic and political power. These women were not just workers, they were master craftswomen, entrepreneurs, and civic leaders. They controlled a valuable industry and protected their trade fiercely, setting their own rules and standards. Other guilds, while perhaps not exclusively female, had substantial female membership. In the brewing guilds of England, for instance, women were very common members, often referred to as brewsters, who ran their own breweries and sold ale publicly. Their records from the Brewers Guild of London in the 15th century show numerous female members who operated their own businesses, paying guild fees and adhering to guild regulations. In many towns, women also participated in the bakers' guilds, known as backsters, running bakeries and selling bread. These women held full guild membership, allowing them to access communal ovens, participate in market regulation, and benefit from guild protections. Women were also members of guilds related to other trades, such as hat making, shoe making, glove making, and even some aspects of the metal trades. While men often dominated the upper echelons of these guilds, women often worked alongside them and could, if widowed, take over the mastership. In some cases, women were admitted to guilds even if their husbands were not members, or if they were single, allowing them to pursue their chosen craft independently. The records of some guilds in German cities, like Cologne and Augsburg, show women admitted as members for various trades, often related to textiles, but also to food preparation and other crafts. Regarding positions of power, while it was less common for women to serve as aldermen or mayors, they certainly held leadership roles within their own guilds, particularly in the all-female ones like the London Silkwomen. The wardens of the Silkwomen's Guild were powerful figures, responsible for enforcing quality standards, resolving disputes among members, and representing the guild's interests to the city authorities. Their decisions had real economic consequences for their members and the industry as a whole. In other mixed-gender guilds, while female mastership was common, direct election to the highest offices might have been rarer, but their influence as master craftswomen and business owners was undeniable. They attended guild meetings, contributed to discussions, and influenced policies through their economic weight and practical experience. The guild system, while complex and varied, recognized the economic contributions of women and provided structures for their participation and, in many cases, their leadership. The notion of guilds as entirely male-dominated institutions that excluded women from all forms of power or membership ignores the extensive historical evidence of women running workshops, leading guilds, and actively shaping the economic landscape of medieval towns and cities through their guild affiliations. Number 3. Medieval working women were always subservient to men in the workplace. The stereotype of medieval working women always being subservient to men in the workplace fails to capture the complex realities of medieval labor relations and the hierarchical structures of families and businesses. While patriarchal norms were strong, countless examples demonstrate women holding positions of authority, supervising both men and women, and exercising significant control over economic enterprises. Their leadership roles emerged from various contexts, including family businesses, independent entrepreneurship, and the management of large estates. In the context of family businesses, the wife often held a crucial role as a partner and co-manager, not merely a subordinate. She might oversee the workshop when her husband was absent, manage the accounts, deal with customers, and supervise apprentices and journeymen, some of whom would be male. For example, a successful merchant's wife would not only manage the household, but also actively participate in the mercantile operations, overseeing the storage of goods, managing sales, and perhaps even representing the business in market transactions. There are records from Florentine merchant families in the 14th century show wives handling complex financial dealings and directing business operations while their husbands were away on long trading voyages. They were effectively co-CEOs of their family enterprises. When a husband died, his widow frequently took over the entire business as the master or proprietor. This meant she directly supervised all employees, including male journeymen and apprentices. She would be responsible for their training, their wages, and the overall management of the workshop. For instance, the widow of a master carpenter in medieval Paris would inherit his workshop and continue to run it, directing her late husband's male apprentices and journeymen in their daily tasks. She was the decision maker, responsible for securing commissions, purchasing materials, and ensuring the quality of the work. This direct supervisory role over male workers was a common and accepted feature of medieval craft and trade. Beyond family businesses, independent female entrepreneurs also hired and supervised male employees. A female innkeeper, for example, might employ male stable hands, porters, and servants. She would manage their schedules, oversee their performance, and handle their wages. The reputation and success of her establishment would depend on her effective management of both male and female staff. Similarly, a female brewster with a large operation might employ male laborers to haul water or grain, or to assist with the heavy lifting involved in brewing. She would be their employer and direct their work. The fact that city records and court documents occasionally show disputes between female employers and their male employees underscores that women did indeed hold supervisory authority over men in the workplace. In the agricultural sphere, while general field labor often involved men and women working side by side or men taking the lead on heavy plowing, women often held supervisory roles within the domestic economy of larger peasant households. The wife might be responsible for overseeing the work of younger male family members or male farmhands in tasks related to dairy production, poultry, or market gardening. On larger manors, a female bailiff or reeve, though rare, could manage a portion of an estate, supervising male tenants and laborers. More commonly, the lady of a noble estate, when her lord was absent, directly managed vast agricultural enterprises. She would give orders to male bailiffs, reeves, and other estate managers. She would oversee the harvest, ensure rents were collected, and manage the extensive financial affairs of the manor, directly supervising male subordinates. The letters of Lady Catherine Beaufort in 15th century England reveal her strong hand in managing her properties and directing her male estate workers. Even within guild structures, as discussed, women who were master craftswomen, particularly widows, directed male journeymen and apprentices within their workshops. The rules of the guilds often stipulated the responsibilities of a master, and a female master was expected to fulfill these responsibilities just as a male master would, including the training and discipline of her male employees. The concept of an apprentice living in the master's household often meant that the master's wife also played a significant role in their daily supervision and welfare, a role that carried authority. The idea of universal subservience also ignores the inherent power dynamics that arise from skill and expertise. A highly skilled female artisan, whether a weaver, an embroiderer, or an illuminator, would command respect for her craft. While she might not be leading a large organization, her specialized knowledge and talent would grant her a form of authority within her professional sphere, irrespective of gender. Apprentices, male or female, learned from the master, and if that master was a woman, they were subservient to her expertise. Ultimately, the medieval workplace, like society itself, was complex and diverse. While patriarchal structures were prevalent, they did not entirely preclude women from exercising authority and leadership. Women supervised male workers in family businesses as independent entrepreneurs and as managers of large estates. Their positions were often earned through skill, inheritance, or necessity, proving that medieval working women were far from universally subservient and often held considerable power and influence in their professional lives. Number 2. All medieval working women were poor and destitute. The stereotype that all medieval working women were uniformly poor and lived lives of destitution is a misleading generalization. While poverty was a harsh reality for a significant portion of the medieval population, including many working women, it is inaccurate to assume that all women who worked were necessarily impoverished. In fact, many medieval working women, through skilled labor, successful entrepreneurship, or inheritance, managed to accumulate significant wealth, achieve social standing, and contribute substantially to their communities, often living lives of relative comfort and even affluence. Successful women in urban trades provide clear examples of this. Female brewers and innkeepers, particularly in bustling towns and cities, often ran highly profitable businesses. Their products, ale and lodging, were in constant demand. A successful brewster, like the one in London in the 14th century, whose tax records reveal substantial earnings, could accumulate enough wealth to own multiple properties, invest in her business, and even employ numerous staff. These women were not just making ends meet, they were building economic empires on a small scale, contributing significantly to the urban economy and often to civic life through their tax contributions. The silkwomen of London are another prime example of wealthy working women. Their guild produced luxury silk goods for the nobility and wealthy elite, commanding high prices for their intricate and exquisite creations. These women were master craftswomen and shrewd business owners. Their records show them owning valuable property, employing apprentices and journeymen, and engaging in large-scale transactions. They were not merely laborers, they were significant figures in the luxury goods market whose prosperity allowed them to live comfortably, dress in fine clothes, and maintain well-appointed households. Their wealth is reflected in the valuable goods they produced and the taxes they paid to the crown. Female merchants, particularly widows who inherited and expanded their husbands' trading networks, could become extremely wealthy. A widow of a successful cloth merchant in Bruges or Genoa might inherit ships, warehouses full of valuable goods, and extensive credit networks across Europe. She would continue and expand these operations, becoming a powerful economic force in her own right. For instance, the wills of some merchant widows from 15th century Florence reveal vast fortunes in property, money, and merchandise, far exceeding the means of most people, male or female. These women could be patrons of the arts, contribute to charitable causes, and influence local politics through their economic power. The landowning women, especially noble women who inherited substantial dower lands or unmarried heiresses, were also significant economic players. They derived considerable income from their estates, which they managed through their own efforts or through hired administrators. This income allowed them to live in grand residences, maintain large households, and participate in aristocratic culture. Lady Margaret Paston, despite her frequent complaints about legal troubles, managed vast properties and enjoyed a lifestyle that was far from destitute, supported by the labor of numerous tenants and servants. Her letters detail purchases of luxurious items and the maintenance of a large household, indicating considerable wealth and spending power. Even among women engaged in less glamorous professions, success could lead to prosperity. A well-regarded midwife or healer, known for her expertise and successful outcomes, could command substantial fees for her services, allowing her to live comfortably and even accumulate savings. These women often served a wide clientele, from common folk to noble families, and their reputation ensured a steady income. Wealthy women often used their fortunes to engage in philanthropy and civic improvements. They might endow chapels, contribute to the building of bridges or town halls, or establish charitable foundations. These acts of public beneficence demonstrate not only their wealth, but also their social standing and influence within their communities. Records of donations and endowments often list women as significant benefactors, further dispelling the notion of universal female poverty. While poverty was a pervasive reality in medieval society, and many working women certainly faced hardship, it is inaccurate to paint all medieval working women with the same brush of destitution. Many, through skill, hard work, inheritance, and astute business management, achieved significant wealth and economic independence, demonstrating the diverse economic outcomes possible for women in the medieval period. Their prosperity contributed to the vibrancy of medieval urban and rural economies, providing jobs, goods, and services, and leaving behind a legacy of economic power and social influence. Number 1. Pregnancy and childbirth completely stopped women from working. The idea that pregnancy and childbirth entirely halted a medieval woman's working life is a romanticized and often inaccurate view, largely applicable only to the wealthiest elite who had the luxury of extensive household staff. For the vast majority of medieval working women, whether in the fields, in urban trades, or in service, pregnancy was a condition that necessitated adaptation, not cessation of work. Women continued to labor throughout much of their pregnancies and returned to their professions remarkably quickly after childbirth, often out of economic necessity. In rural agricultural communities where most medieval people lived, a woman's labor was indispensable to her family's survival. Pregnant peasant women continued to work in the fields, performing tasks appropriate to their physical state. While heavy plowing or intense harvesting might have been reduced in the very late stages, lighter tasks like weeding, tending kitchen gardens, gathering fodder, or managing animals continued. A woman might carry water, milk cows, or spin wool at home, all of which contributed directly to the household economy. Accounts from manorial records do not show a significant drop in women's labor contributions during pregnancy or immediately after childbirth. Instead, they indicate a continuous presence in the agricultural workforce. The economic imperative to produce food and goods meant that a sustained break from labor was simply not an option for most families. In urban trades, women running shops, taverns, or workshops also continued to work throughout their pregnancies. A female baker would still be at her oven, a brewster at her vats, and a market vendor at her stall, often until very close to the time of delivery. Their livelihoods depended on continuous operation. While they might have adapted their work, perhaps sitting more or having assistants handle heavier tasks, the business itself would not simply shut down. For instance, a woman managing an inn would still oversee guests, finances, and staff, even while heavily pregnant. Her patrons relied on her services, and she relied on their custom. After childbirth, the return to work was often remarkably swift. For peasant women, a few days or weeks might be the maximum period of recovery before returning to essential agricultural tasks. Newborns were often carried to the fields or cared for by older siblings or female relatives within the household. The concept of an extended maternity leave simply did not exist for most. The demands of subsistence agriculture meant that every able body was needed. Historical sources like personal letters or legal depositions sometimes hint at the speed of recovery. For example, a woman might be recorded as appearing in court a few weeks after having given birth, demonstrating her return to public life and responsibilities. For urban working women, the urgency of returning to work was similar. A shop owner would likely reopen her business as soon as physically possible. If she had employees, they might keep the business running in the immediate aftermath of childbirth, but her presence as the manager and proprietor would be vital for continued success. The system of wet nursing was also prevalent, especially among wealthier urban families, which allowed mothers to resume their professional duties relatively quickly by entrusting the infant's feeding to another woman. This was a practical solution that enabled mothers to return to their businesses or skilled crafts. Even women in more physically demanding trades, such as those involved in construction or heavy manufacturing, would adapt their roles rather than cease work entirely. They might take on lighter duties or focus on supervisory tasks. For example, a woman involved in a textile workshop might shift from operating heavy looms to overseeing spinners or managing accounts during the later stages of pregnancy and immediately after childbirth. The primary support system for working women during and after pregnancy was often the extended family and local community. Female relatives, older children, or neighbors might provide assistance with childcare, cooking, or household chores, enabling the new mother to recover and return to her vital work. The emphasis was on communal support to ensure the household's economic stability, rather than an expectation of prolonged individual rest. While childbirth was undeniably dangerous and a period of vulnerability for medieval women, the economic realities of the time dictated that most women could not afford a long period of complete inactivity. Their working lives adapted to the demands of pregnancy and motherhood, proving that women were not simply sidelined but continued to play an active and essential role in the medieval economy through all phases of their lives.